Hello, my dear students of Level 6, the course of Western Intellectual History. This is Dr. Maha Salam, and this is the second video that I have been recording to you. Today we are going to talk about a fourth political philosopher belonging also to the age of the Enlightenment. This time it would be a French philosopher, an 18th century French philosopher. His name is Montesquieu. Montesquieu belonged to the French aristocracy and was living in France at a time when the political turmoil reached its maximum. Although he belonged to a privileged class, but because he was part of the new era with all the atmosphere of freedom and fighting against oppression and individualism and secular thinking, because of all this, Montesquieu was very critical of the political state of France during the 18th century. He studied law, and of course his study of the law deepened his criticism of contemporary French life, whether political, social, or economic. And in addition to the law, he also studied experimental sciences. You have to remember that this is a time of the rise of science and how science causes one to be open-minded to new arguments and new inventions. So in addition to his study of the law, he studied anatomy as an experimental science. Now, if someone was in the place of Montesquieu, a French aristocrat, an enlightened French aristocrat living in the 18th century, living under a monarch or king who was considering himself the divine representative on earth, like he had a divine right to govern people, and of course there was no freedom of expression at all and no opposition, regardless of anything that the monarch might do. So for someone like Montesquieu, he wanted a way out of this dilemma of feeling so critical against the status quo, but not daring to write openly against what was happening. He chose to write a book called Persian Letters in 1721, and this is one of two famous books that Montesquieu has written. The second is The Spirit of the Laws. We will talk about it shortly. But let's go back to the Persian Letters. The title seems to be a bit strange. Actually, it was written under a pseudonym or a number of pseudonyms, as if it is in the form of several letters written by Persian tourists who came to visit France and who were criticizing French society and French political contemporary life because of the absolute monarchy, the lack of liberties, and the strict censorship. This last item, the strict censorship, would of course explain to us why Montesquieu could never put his real name as the author of the book, or else he would have been arrested, put in jail, tortured, or maybe even executed. The title of Montesquieu's second book is The Spirit of the Laws. It was written in the mid-18th century, 1748 to be exact, and again he had to perform a certain trick in order to avoid censorship, and this time the trick was that the book was published in Geneva, Switzerland, which was a place of relative freedom when compared with the strict censorship of Paris. Now, this book, The Spirit of the Laws, as you can see, it was a book mainly about the history of the law and the philosophy of the law. In this book, Montesquieu studied how the law has begun and how it evolved and developed in various human societies, especially European ones. And he also studied the purpose of the law, the goals behind the law, what the law aims to achieve, and so on. It was a very comprehensive study, and it was a study that took almost 20 years. The last 20 years of its author's life were spent in writing this book, and it is made up of 31 volumes, and actually it represents his respect for the law and his deep interest in whatever has to do with the law. Speaking of the law, Montesquieu came up with a concept or a term called the law of nature. According to him, the law of nature represented the necessary relations that arise from the nature of things. Now, what do we mean by that? He was interested in combining the natural or physical conditions of a certain country and the type of government that this country has. He said that there are three major types of government. There is the republic, and there is the monarchy, and then the despotism, which is the absolute monarchy. Now, the republic was like the city-state of ancient Greece. It was a model of what we mean by republican government. And in this government, in this type of government, the civil virtue of the citizens is of paramount importance. The monarchy, on the other side, depends on what we call the sense of honor of the military. The military have a sense of honor, and they are very proud of their country, and they are ready to defend it, especially in the case of monarchy, because they are defending king and country. But you have to pay attention that if the monarchy is an absolute one, like the monarchy in this case of France, then we are talking about the third type of government, which is the worst type, the despotism or the absolute monarchy. The monarch is absolute. Nobody dares contradict or oppose him. There is no parliament, or if there is a parliament, it is just a parliament in name only, but it doesn't dare to pass laws or to do anything that might be against the will or the wishes of the monarch. Now, in the case of a despotism, the main item or element here is the fear of the people, the citizens, the subjects, if you like to call them subject or citizen, the population, the ordinary members of the society, the masses. They are frightened or terrified. They cannot do anything against despotism. And at the same time, they have a slavish nature. They are submissive. They do not dare to rebel against the despot or against the despotism of the government. So you can see that Montesquieu's thought was developed in a way that was combining the nature of a country, like the conditions of the country, including the climate, even the geography, the customs and traditions of the people, the habits, everything about the country. he was saying that each country has certain circumstances, and from these circumstances, there are certain types of government that are suitable. For example, the republic would be a suitable type for people who have civil virtues. They are good citizens, they are honest, they are hardworking. Each of them has his own individual freedom and so on. So they deserve to have a republic and a democracy. But when other people mainly are dealing with the honor of the king and the honor of the country and the honor of the military, then these people would be suited to have a monarch or a type of government called monarchy. And the third type, the worst type, this is the type suitable for slaves or cowards or people who are frightened. So in this way, it seems that Montesquieu was raising the consciousness of his French compatriots. He was telling them, if you are okay with the absolute monarchy that we have, which is another name for despotism, this means that you have a slavish nature, a cowardly nature. You do not enjoy the civil virtues that were enjoyed by the ancient Greek citizens. You do not even have the military honor that was during the Middle Ages in the times of feudalism. And this way, it was an implied criticism of his government. Now, because, again, Montesquieu was deeply interested in the study of the law, he was inventing or coming up with neologisms about the law. You have here, for example, the term positive law. Now, the word positive is not like the opposite of the word negative. Usually we say positive and negative when we are talking about electricity, for example, electrical poles or something. But here the word positive comes from the verb to posit, which is of Latin extraction, and it means to put something, so that the positive law is the law which is put by human beings. When human beings, the legislators, when they sit together and they put laws and rules and regulations, for example, if you commit kada, you are going to have to pay a fine, or if you do such a thing, you are going to be put in jail, or so on. So this is what we call the positive law. Positive means put or posited by human beings. But then we have another type of law, and he called this the absolute justice. But please remember, the word absolute here is not used in a derogatory meaning like when he says absolute monarchy. When he says absolute monarchy, this is like tyranny or despotism. But when he says absolute justice, prior to positive law, he is talking about a sense of fairness or equality, something that we all had since the beginning of humanity, even before we put laws, even before the positive law. For example, he says that the rule that anyone is innocent until proved guilty, this rule belongs to the absolute justice, the ideal or the value of absolute justice that we always had even before we posited laws and rules and regulations. Also, the idea that we are equal, equality or fairness of human beings, again, these ideas, they belong to the realm of absolute justice, which is a value or an ideal that was prior to positive law. And again, number 5, the fifth point or concept in his thought relates to the laws and to political real power, which is a term you are familiar with from the lecture of John Locke, the separation of powers. Montesquieu came after John Locke, and he adopted or he agreed to the concept of separation of powers so that there is a balance, and the word balance is one of the concepts introduced by Montesquieu. And this separation of powers or this concept of balance is very apparent in the United States Constitution that was posited during the 18th century under the influence of Montesquieu and his thought, and also the Declaration of the Rights of Man, again another universal document that was influenced by the thought of Montesquieu and that came into existence during the late years of the 18th century. Now, one final point about the thought of Montesquieu. Some people claim that Montesquieu's thought has certain contradictions. For example, we have two examples of these contradictions. The first example is that Montesquieu believed in what we call relativism. And the critics of Montesquieu claim that if you believe in relativism, that things are relative, this would be in contradiction with the notion of absolute justice. We have just now been talking about absolute justice and how it came before the positive law put by human beings. But if you claim that things are relative, like values or whatever is right can change from one place to another or from one time to another, and like Montesquieu even claimed that if there is a certain type of government that has been ongoing and successful for many centuries, for a long time, then this means that it is a good government or that it is suitable for its people. If you believe in such relativism, then you are contradicting yourself, because this is against the notion of absolute justice. And this is what we mean by the second point, that this relativism can be misused in order to justify any system of government. Now, we have finished Montesquieu's thought, and remember, the man was a figure of the Enlightenment. He went on a European tour in order to study and compare the various political systems in different European countries, such as Germany, England, Hungary, Austria, Holland, and he was studying the good points and the bad points in each political system in an attempt to reach or to come up with an ideal form of government. For example, he celebrated and admired the constitutional monarchy of England, considering it to be the opposite of the absolute monarchy of France, because in England we have a monarch, king or queen, but they are not ruling in an absolute way. There is a constitution and a parliament which is ruling the country. And at the same time, he criticized what he thought of as the corruption that was in the English parliament during the 18th century. So the man was a careful and comprehensive student of the various political systems, trying to come up with an ideal one. We might agree or disagree with some of his thought, but in all cases, it is valuable to know his thought as an integral part of political theory and political philosophy. Your source of study should include a careful reading of all the pages from 91 to 95 in your handouts that belong to Montesquieu's chapter. And let me wish you very good luck. Bye-bye.